What's going on? I'm Sean, and this is my first watch.
I'm Brad. This is my rewatch. We're doing The Wire, Season 2, Episode 1, Ebb Tide. We made it, man.
Yeah, Season 2, the season premiere. I feel like a real viewer. That's what's so interesting about the experience where you have to wait. You feel like a real viewer. It's not a binge experience. It's very different from binging because I had to wait for this premiere. Yeah.
And we were talking about how to do this, and I was just so excited for your reaction because, and I don't think you knew what I was expecting your reaction to be.
What were you expecting?
Exactly what it was.
Okay.
And so I was excited for you to completely drop out of this show. I was excited for you to go, what the hell are we doing now? And not just that, you surpassed that. You almost went into a coma.
I did fall asleep. There's probably footage of me nodding off that we shouldn't show, but I did fall asleep a couple times. But the good news is I rewatched awake the whole time, and it's perfect because the show's first rewatch. So I rewatched also. So technically my rewatch and my first watch because I had to rewatch because I fell asleep the first time. Yeah, it was boring for me at first. I really had to just invest in the idea that this stuff will pay off.
You were interested in season 1, episode 1 and 2, but you openly admitted that had we not be doing this together, we weren't doing this as a show, you probably wouldn't keep going as enthusiastically or as rapidly. You might have given up on the first season because there were just so much. You weren't sure what was important, kind of like what you're saying now. What's the payoff? What's worth it? So I guess in a similar fashion, and maybe that's what a lot of fans or a lot of people who aren't fans who hate the season or don't like this show, and this season is the season that turned them off. I think it's the same thing that you invest a lot in season 1, and then you come back, and as I say, there's tons of white people all of a sudden.
That's funny. Well, I do want to touch on what you just said because it's interesting. Season 1 is a good parallel because season 1, episode 1, there were so many characters, so much going on. It was hard to invest, hard to know what to care about. Like you said, everything you said. The difference with season 2 is yes, I know we're watching this together and they gave me that level of knowing it's going to pay off. But also it's all right, after you've gotten through that, season 1's awesome and it's great. So then to start all over again in season 2 that's more so what's the slap in the face. It's wait, who are these people? Wait, only one scene with Avon? Stuff like that. So.
And, especially the way that season 1 drops you off. And we talked about it, and I allowed you to believe that this was going to be the primary of season 2 with all these characters. And while we do bring most of these characters into season 2 with episode 1, they're clearly not the primary story for episode 1. But it leaves you, the season 1 drops you off so nicely and neatly in a nice little package of, here's where all the characters are for you ready to pick back up. And like you said, we get a scene with Avon.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll just say one other thing is that people also keep telling me that season 3 picks back up to where season 1 kind of was. It gets us right back in that world. So knowing that, I have the benefit of knowing that season 2 is kind of an anomaly. And I can enjoy it for that reason. So now when I went to my rewatch, I went into it kind of like not a pilot, what do you call it? A spinoff. I kind of went into it like a spinoff. This is my world, my characters. This is hey, I loved Unbreakable. Here's Split or something. You know what I mean? Because I know it's the same world. So I didn't come in with those same expectations as when I fell asleep. I knew that this is a different world. It's a different pacing. So let me get attuned to that. So.
And I will say this, now that we're going to get into the season and to this episode specifically here in a second, that every season now it kind of has the caveat of a new world. I think what makes this one, honestly, I think it's because it's all white characters. It's not on the streets. Whereas season 3, 4, and 5, we're still going to get introduced to new worlds, but the amount of characters that are not black are very, very small in those worlds. We're going to get more into politics, school systems, kids specifically on the streets, where there's just a lot more black and brown faces. Whereas this is such a diversion, so I think that's why people categorize it as such an anomaly. But if this was, I don't know, a youth program, people, I think, wouldn't think of it, a youth program in West Baltimore. I don't think people would look at it as much of an anomaly as they do this specifically with the docks and the Sobotkas. So Ebb Tide is the name of the episode. We start right off with McNulty. He is on the boat. He's miserable. It's wintertime, and McNulty is freezing. They come upon, it's him and his partner there, and they come upon this party boat. And McNulty comes on board, and we get a scene setter of what McNulty deals with on a day-to-day.
Yeah.
I guess these guys are dead in the water, and he wants them to come back to shore, and they give him a little pay to keep them in the water and just give them a slow tow out of the area. I guess they're in a fishing channel or something like that, somewhere where they're not supposed to be. And it's just very boring.
The job, right? Yeah, the job seems very mundane. It's not up McNulty's alley. There's nothing to chase.
So they keep the party going longer, and that's just it. We cut to our opening credits and brand new song. What do you think of the new theme song?
I really like it. There's a lot of soul. And to your point about all the white characters, I mean, this song is real soulful, so maybe you can negate some of that. So I like it.
Brand new opening montage, so all new clips. Clearly, some different characters that are being seen. Some different.
But Bodie throwing the rock still makes it into certain things carry over, right?
Yep. Certain things keep going, and I think that's indicative of what what every season is. Even though we get, like I said, new characters, new storylines, new settings, they still bring everyone else that's important along with it.
Yeah.
So then we get our quote, "Ain't never going to be what it was," and that's from a guy named Little Big Roy, who is one of the guys on the docks. And we start off, at least we continue on with a familiar face. We get Presbalewski, and he is with his father-in-law. It's our first kind of like real back and forth with the father-son-in-law with Valchek, Stan Valchek. And this season is really going to start to circle around Valchek and kind of a case that he's trying to work on now. And this is where we get the beginnings of that, where
now, Valchek's a major, right?
He's the major. And he is the one, if we remember from season 1, that Daniels covered for Presbalewski, and Valchek told him, you've got suction with me now. And then
he still has suction with him, even though he lost his place with Burrell. I mean, don't tell me if it's a spoiler, please, but I feel like that's going to come back into play.
I think the more important thing is that he has a relationship with him.
With Daniels?
Yeah. If I'm being honest, I can't really remember if there's a suction thing that comes into play, not because it does or doesn't, but I can't really remember. But I think the most important thing is that he still has this bond through Presbalewski to Daniels.
And he really spoke highly of him and Freeman to Valchek. And I don't know if Valchek was paying attention because he was admiring the stained glass pictures, or stained glass sculptures, however you call it, stained glass.
Stained glass, yeah. So Presbalewski is talking to Valchek about what he wants to do next, and giving all these props to the case, like we talked about at the end of season 1. Everyone really speaks highly about how this is pretty much the best thing they've ever done in their career, and much like I guess we see later with Kima, who is at a desk in narcotics. Presbalewski wants to go that route. He wants to get more investigative. He wants to follow the money. He's asking to go maybe to narcotics, forfeitures, something like that. And
yeah, he wants to do investigative work. He really wants to work. And it's crazy. Just, I don't know, man. Like, maybe I'm a sucker for characters like this, but just to see him go from his introduction as an idiot who can't, handle his gun to now he's being held back he's ambitious and he's being held back. It's like, I feel for him. So.
And he wants to think. He wants to be what they kind of talked about, good police. And there's so few characters on the show that are good police. And here Presbalewski could be on the verge because he had great teaching with Freeman. And he talked about not caring previously when in the previous roles that he had before getting to this detail. Now he truly cares. And Valchek, all he cares about is this dove. It's the dove. And he was listening to Presbalewski because he pretty much runs down what the plan is. And it's very much of a controlling father-in-law. You're going to do what's best for my daughter, essentially. And what he deems best is that Prez-Belusky go the career route. He make rank. And Prez says, I don't want to make rank.
Right. He wants to work good cases.
Good cases. Bodhi and Shamrock, that is that guy's name. I don't think we ever get a name during the episode, but his name is Shamrock. They are driving
Bodhi back. I'm not gonna lie to you, and I have to correct my previous statement from our last episode. For those who are actually paying attention, you asked me who my favorite characters were, and with Kima and Freeman, but Bodhi's on there too. Bodhi's actually above Kima a little bit for me. So
we're going into season 2 now. We're going Freeman, Bodhi, Kima.
Yeah.
I like that. So Bodhi and Shamrock, they're driving to Philly. They're in some sort of a van. And it's a very ambiguous journey. We can assume it's illegal, but this whole time, there's a lot of references to cell phone activity, talking to him, what he said, this location they're going to. And at the same time, there's somebody following them, 2 somebodies following them. And so every time we're going back into the scene, we're learning a little bit more just from assumption and little bit of clues that they're dropping. But at this point, all we know is that these guys are driving to Philly in this van, and Bodhi has never been out of Baltimore.
I thought it was very interesting how Bodhi didn't know there were different radio stations. It's not an unrealistic dialogue. Like, I've had conversations like that with people who've never left their neighborhoods. So it's funny.
Yeah, pretty interesting social commentary, but they do it in a really interesting, or in a comedic way, I guess.
Now, you mentioned the 2 cars. I assumed, just based on the conversation and everything that happened in the end of season 1 with D'Angelo and his mom, and, D'Angelo's mom kind of reprimanded Avon for not having a follow car for when D'Angelo went to go pick up the weight in New York. I kind of assumed that was going on with Bodhi and his car. I assumed they were going to pick up whatever weight from whoever, because there was a car in the front and then Bodhi was driving in the back. But then, like you said, there was a 3rd car following them, so that's what threw me off. I'm like, is this another Omar situation where you have someone spying on them, ready to steal, or, so it was interesting. It was very intriguing, and I was very tuned into what was going on there.
Especially Bodhi's the only character that we know. Shamrock is a brand new character, so it's very unclear what the relationship is between them and, yeah, like you said, this other car behind them. A lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
We keep going with them. Bodhi goes into a garage. He writes down the mileage and takes off in the car. The van then follows, and the tail is still behind them. We then go to Bunk, who finally goes to visit McNulty on the boat. We get to see them reunite pretty quickly. And we find out a great line: the Bunk can't swim, doesn't want to get on the boat. And he's really there because he needs Omar for the William Gant case. That all those activities are going to start coming up in trial, and Bunk needs to get a line on Omar, who we know from last season disappeared in the South Bronx.
Right.
And Bunk, this entire time, he's asking Jimmy, really the entire episode is asking Jimmy about Omar. Jimmy never really answers him. We never get any type of information from McNulty on Omar, whether he knows, whether he's protecting him, whether he's lost contact, if Omar's reached out. We don't really know much about Omar at all from Jimmy.
Yeah, he avoids the question completely.
Mm-hmm. Bunk does bring up, and they do this a few times, they keep reminding you that Landsman is the only person that knew that Jimmy wanted to be on the boat, that Jimmy didn't want to be on the boat. And so the first mention of it is Bunk saying that, Jay wants his $10 because he said, I bet you 10, you're riding the boat. And McNulty's basically, fuck him. He's the one that probably told Rawls. We get to meet now Frank Sobotka, who's going to be one of our main guys for season 2, brand new character, who is talking to Nat about the canal. And this is going to be the big passion of this character, is fixing the canal, the ports in Baltimore, getting the canal or getting some sort of business happening with the ports and getting ships in there and the construction needed to accommodate all the ships so that guys can get hours, guys can work. The business has been drying up. And so Nat, and who seems to be a president, I think, of one of the unions, is going back and forth with Frank about what's the right route to take and whether they should do the canal, or there's talk about this bridge that they want to get fixed. And I think Nat wants to go a different route. But he gets mad. They can't agree, and he leaves, and the others kind of laugh at him. And it's a very blue-collar group of guys, very ball-busting. But it does seem at the end of the day, their main goal is to get everyone back working again, because that's not happening right now.
Yeah, and I was a little unclear. Maybe you can explain what his role was. Not the union guy, not the black dude, but our new main character. What's his name again?
Frank Sobotka.
Yeah. So is he in charge of the shipping? I know he's in charge of shipping yard and function, but what exactly is he?
I believe he's treasurer.
Okay.
So I think he's in charge of the money, getting money, where the money gets spent, how the money gets spent.
Okay.
Those types of things. I believe that's what he is.
Okay. And then it took me, the second watch to realize, that conversation was one situation, even though I don't know the specifics, one situation would have workers working sooner than the other, but Frank's idea would have the workers working longer. So it seems like that was the conversation and what the argument was about.
Yeah, and I think that's a very common discussion when talking about labor unions and jobs and what's going to make more money in the short term to get people working or get the economy booming versus what's something that's going to be a long-lasting, long-term fix to this problem. That's really what they're arguing here.
Yeah. And
we keep up with the ports, and we get to see the cans that are moving. That's or containers. That's kind of the terminology that they use for these big, I don't know containers that are on the docks that get moved by big trucks and forklifts, and we get to see Frank hanging around there lighting up a cigarette. We meet Nick, who is Frank's nephew. Nick Sobotka, and a lot of these characters, a lot of these actors are people that since then I've come to recognize in other shows like True Blood, Weeds, I believe Orange is the New Black. Nick Sobotka is in for a few years. So I don't know if you've seen any of those shows.
Nope, zero. So, but my wife watches all those, so I'm sure she'll recognize them. So
there you go. Frank tells Nick to go see the Greek because he's got a new number, new cans for him. So there's something going on with this guy, the Greek. And a worker comes to Frank and tells him that he's got to get to Ziggy. Ziggy's all over the place. And so Frank goes to meet up with Ziggy on the docks, and there's a truck driver there, and that guy's pissed. Apparently Ziggy has lost the can that this guy was supposed to pick up, and the guy's been there all day waiting, looking. And Frank pretty quick gets into Ziggy's ass and fires him. And the driver feels good that he got some sort of justice. But as they're pulling off, the third worker there tells this driver that he's not fired, that Frank is actually Ziggy's dad.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole thing was just a dog and pony show.
Yep, and a pretty solid introduction to show us that Ziggy is pretty much a fuck up.
Yeah. Bunk goes down to the evidence room. He is looking to pull the William Gant evidence bag, and we find Lieutenant Cedric Daniels down there, and that's his new stomping ground. McNulty got the boat, Freeman got homicide, and Daniels got evidence.
Like, the Ralph Wiggum meme when he on Lisa breaks his heart, like when Daniels walked out, like that's what I felt. I'm like, damn, that's where they put you, man. Like, but he crossed Burrell. I get it.
So they're talking, catching up, and they find out that the evidence is actually missing from the shelf. It's just not there. And Daniels, being that this was his case, I think gives more of a shit than anyone in evidence ever could give a shit. So Bunk is actually pretty lucky that Daniels is the guy down there.
Yeah, otherwise he would be screwed. And it was interesting the way the evidence was missing because the officer who was in charge was like, it's written to be on a shelf that doesn't exist, essentially. So that's interesting.
Yeah, so I guess hard to say, at this point, bad record keeping, or was it devious, or really with this police department, I could believe that it was just bad record keeping.
I mean, it's possible, but it's a little too convenient because of who's involved. So
very true. Bodie is still driving through town. He has to take a detour. I believe that's in Camden or somewhere around there, or Cherry Hill or somewhere in Jersey, I think, that he has to turn off. But they eventually go through to this garage, and the tail is still on them. we now cut back to Frank Sobotka, and he is sitting in a church pew, and he's got a stack of cash that he's putting in an envelope. And the priest walks up, and it's not very like secret or hush hush. Frank hands the priest the money pretty plainly, this envelope pretty plainly, and the priest isn't ashamed or anything like that. And he's pretty. I think the priest is impressed with the money. He even mentions at some point how much Frank, and this is from the union, has donated to the church more than necessary, and what it's bought them is this church window that is going to go right in the center of their church. And Frank, in return, asked for some FaceTime with the senator of Maryland, which I think is like the name that they use, I can't remember, but it is like a real senator in Maryland at that time.
Interesting. Okay.
And the priest is like more than happy. He even tells him, and this is when he admits that the money that Frank is given is more than necessary for the window that they bought. So they're kicking up some big money to the church, which I think when we see how Stan Valachek, his meeting goes with the priest, very different in I think how genuine Frank is and his relationship with religion, with the church, even though he's clearly got something going on here that's not on the up and up. He clearly has some sort of a relationship with this priest, with the church, that is not just based on money and not just based on a quid quo pro.
Yeah, that's a good point you make, and a good distinction between Valchek's conversation too. Because again, something I needed to rewatch to understand and see the nuance in, but and I don't want to jump too much ahead if I forget when that scene comes up, but Valchek is clearly fishing for, he thinks he's going in there with more ammunition than he needs. He thinks he's overpaying, and it turns out he's underpaying by a lot. So it's just interesting seeing him be shot down in that way.
There is one more part where Frank is asked by the priest, when's the last time since your last confession, when referencing, the money and the fact that the priest is aware that there's a lot of guys on the union that are broke and are confessing some bad things and things that they're doing for money because they can't afford, I guess, life. And that's when he asked Frank, when's the last time since you confessed? And he does laugh at him there. Mm-hmm. Shamrock and Bodhi are in the garage with a couple other guys, and they have torn this car apart. Now it's clear they're looking for something, and this is when they're talking about him or he. What's he going to say? Is that what you want to tell him? And they're looking for drugs.
Yeah, it's clear. Now, again, referencing our last episode where they went to Philly to go bust Weebay, and we were like, nah, that's probably not Philly. This all looked like Philadelphia to me. Like, it was legit, the streets and the parking garage and the center city, whatever. It all looked like Philly to me.
Okay.
But I don't know how you felt about that. You're the home native, so.
The detour looked like it could have been like a Walt Whitman Bridge, like detour or something like that, but nothing specific that stood out.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm good at picking those things out though.
I feel like I am, and I'm like, oh, that's Philly right away. Okay. Anyway, back to what was actually going on in Philly. What did you think about them not finding the weight? Were you scared for them? I mean, maybe go back to your first watch, but were you scared for them that, oh shit, like Stringer's gonna, like they messed up, Stringer's gonna do something? Or did you think it was a test? I always thought it was some sort of test that Stringer was setting up for them for whatever reason. I didn't necessarily think the weight was missing.
I wasn't sure because I wasn't sure what the tail was, and until you get a better idea of who they were,
that's true.
I didn't know if those guys had already stolen what was supposed to be in there, and I wasn't sure positively if this was a Stringer operation that they're working with. What was the relationship at this point between Bodhi and Stringer? Where is Stringer? I just wasn't. There were so many unknowns at this point that I was still trying to figure out, and to be honest, almost creating my own narrative of what makes the most sense.
As soon as he said that man and he was using pronouns, though, I knew he was talking about Stringer. That I was sure about. So.
I was pretty sure, too, and I was just wondering, what was the purpose of the characters not saying his name? And I think even probably for me, not accustomed to, we don't talk indoors and all the trouble they had with people saying names on the phone. And Bodie was one of those guys that said a name at one point on the phone, that they don't ever say Stringer's name. Very smart. I probably forgot that you're not supposed to do that. Oh, the tail also checks at some point, and that's when you start to get a little bit more of an idea. They don't know what's going on. They, at this point, expect Bodie and Shamrock to be out of the garage. They say something like taking their time, aren't they? And so one guy gets out and takes a look and sees that they are freaking out in the garage.
Yeah.
Daniels and Bunk still looking through the evidence, and we get to see the other cop that was working evidence with them, and he's pretty lazy, kind of a throwback to maybe to Polk and Mahone, wondering if this means overtime, because Daniels is saying, we're going to search every single shelf here till we find this bag.
I mean, I don't blame this guy. I mean, she got searched through every piece of evidence. I'd want some overtime, too.
Greggs is in forfeitures at a desk in narcotics, and Herc comes in and tells Kima how easy it is to arrest white guys. And all you have to do is set a guy up and say, you want to buy drugs? The white guy, there's no code words, there's no underman, there's just the drug dealer who says, how much drugs do you want to buy? And then the guy shows up with the drugs and he says, give me the drugs. And you give him the money and the drugs, and then you arrest them. And Kima is, her look changes a little bit when he says, like, you gotta give it up to black guys, almost like it's a specialty of black people to sell drugs.
Well, yeah, he said there should be different laws for white people. It's interesting. We're glad to see Kima is 100%, or at least back to normal physically. She's walking and not in the hospital. And
yeah, she mentioned she's there because she made a promise to Cheryl, her girlfriend, to not be in action anymore. And Herc kind of goes her a little bit and says, oh, you want to take a door with us? And you can see she really does want to be in some action again, but that's when she does say she made a promise, she can't do it. And Herc tells Kima, if you were a guy, we'd take you out to the bar and buy you a beer and tell you the truth, that you're whipped. Bunk and McNulty, speaking of the bar, are at the bar picking up where they left off. And McNulty
tries to get Omar out of him again to no avail.
And McNulty's just playing dumb.
He says, who?
Who? Yeah. Bodie and Shamrock now are headed home. They're nervous, and there's more of this he talk. He just said, come on home. How'd he say it? He just said it. And we see those other guys are in the back of the van. Everyone is freaked out. Ziggy is on Nick about meeting the Greek. And Nick tells Ziggy that the Greek and these guys are real. They're at this bar, this local Cheersy type of bar. And we get to meet a lot of guys, but we don't really get to learn any names from any of these people. And to be honest, like in watching the scene, there's nothing important detail-wise that's going on. They're just going on and ragging on each other about different unions and manliness, and it's just a lot of nonsense talk. I guess to just really give you an idea that these are blue-collar guys.
Yeah, and then I get the distinction between, well, again, they're established. I feel like Ziggy is is a star of episode 1. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like he's a star of episode 1. So this was another scene to show that, hey, he's a fuck up at his job and he's not necessarily good and he's got nepotism, but something about him, he has a good relationship with his cousin or nephew, whatever they are.
Yeah,
so
his cousin.
They're close. Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, he pulls out his dick near the end of the scene, and everyone expected. They're all saying he's going to pull his dick out. He's going to pull. So this is clearly something that he does. The live band kicks in, and everyone just drinking, and the bartender's convulsing, and it's just I don't know.
I mean, it's definitely very white, if that's what you're getting at. I'll give you that. But I get why it was there. It establishes that world, so I understand.
It just doesn't have the nuance of ain't no man get to be on legal motherfucking tender except be president. It doesn't have that nuance. So like the chicken McNugget.
That scene doesn't, but I think the scene with the union head and the treasurer, that did though.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. McNulty finds a floater in the water, and his partner's saying, the body. It's just the differences here. I guess this is probably the first body that McNulty's found in the water. Maybe the first sense of action he's had since he's been on the boat now. And his partner says, don't pick it up. It'll fall apart. How long do you think it's been there? And they're going to just pull it into the shore. Nick Sobotka wakes up. He lives in the basement of his parents' house. This is after the long night of drinking with Ziggy. Ziggy is sleeping on the couch, and Nick's mom is upstairs, and she tells him kitchen is closed. And the mom wants Nick to be up earlier, going to get hours. This is where we're starting to find a little bit about how the port works with scheduling and picking up hours, even though there's not a lot of time for hours for people to get. It's kind of first come, first serve, but it also goes by seniority. And so Nick is positive that there's no point in even getting down to the ports, to the docks early, because he's not going to get any hours.
Right. We also get a little interesting dynamic, like you mentioned it, where he's not allowed to get any breakfast. She's like, get out of here. And Ziggy, who's sleeping on the couch, later on, he does get some breakfast. So I think it's just funny. It's going to reinforce the whole thing that Ziggy, for whatever reason, people seem to protect him. People seem to really enjoy him, love him, even though he's not really that valuable. He's not really contributing much. But, he's like the little brother that you just take care of, even though he's a mess up. At least that's how they're playing him off in season 1. So
Nick takes down a big glass of beer for breakfast, too. And his mom is just a bunch of drunks I got. And you definitely got that feel from the bar scene the previous night. We go back to Valchek, and this is now him going to the priest, and he's giving a donation. I think it's like $2,500. And the priest, first of all, the priest says something like, we haven't seen you around here in months. And then you show up and you've got a militia or an army with you or something. And that's because Valchek has the police force bringing in all of his Dove and police union windows. And so that's where we really get the difference that we talked about a little bit earlier between Valchek, who seems to have this real constant connection or relationship with the priest in the church, versus Valchek, who the priest even feels comfortable almost throwing a dig at, like, you're never even here, and now you show up with all these gifts, obviously knowing something's up. And this is where Valchek has to basically pull it out of the priest as far as where did this other window come from this union, and it came from Frank Sobotka. And Valchek even tries to up the price. He says, listen, I could go, 4,000. Was it more than that? And the priest tells him it was more than $4,000.
Well, he doesn't even say anything. He just kind of like McNulty's him, doesn't even respond.
Mm-hmm. But he does confirm it was more than $2,500. And so there's no way for the priest to take Valchek's window at this point over the Sobotka union port worker window, and tells Valchek, you need to go work it out with Frank.
Yeah, he says maybe you should take a visit to Frank. And it's funny because he kind of leaves in a huff, and all the cops are like carrying the stained glass, like, what do we do with this?
Yeah, he doesn't even care anymore. Ray Cole catches the floater from McNulty when they call it in, and we just really get a little bit of catch up between Cole and McNulty, and we find out that Bunk was from the bar the night before, was puking in the toilet this morning at the station. Can't hold his liquor, McNulty says. Now we finally get to see Stringer.
Yeah, because that's in this a second famous meme. How you gonna skip the meme, man? That's a Stringer Bell meme where he just walks away. So that was him and Bodie, right?
We just go right to Bodie in the funeral parlor. He's waiting on, we find out Stringer. We know from last season that the office is in the funeral parlor, and everyone's waiting. We see those guys that were tailing Bodie and Shamrock, and we eventually find out these guys are working with Stringer. They were tailing. There's a lot of going back and forth with mileage on this piece of paper. He's asking these guys how much time did it take. He's asking Shamrock. He's asking the tail about mileage and the time, same type of questions. They've got the actual mileage written down. And Bodie is freaking out. And Stringer eventually comes up to Bodie, and he makes Bodie tell the whole story again. And this is then when he reveals, I don't know, I felt weird about this because I felt like these weren't very clever reveals by Stringer, but Bodie was so impressed or so in awe of Stringer's powers.
Yeah, I think that was the point. I think I got two things from this scene. It was, Stringer showing Bodie who's in charge, showing him that he has eyes everywhere. He's always watching everything, just, asserting his dominance over the organization. But also, we know that Stringer is very detailed in these pickups. So the fact that the weight didn't come is not part of the plan. So I think those were the two takeaways I got from it.
Yeah, so we learned for sure that this was about drugs. There were supposed to be drugs in the car. Bodie and Shamrock couldn't find the drugs. They were being clocked by their mileage and the amount of time that they went from location to location. And so when we talked earlier about the detour, that obviously took some extra length, like point some miles added to their time that they were never supposed to drive. So that's something that Stringer's checking. Stringer's being very meticulous, which is why we kind of talked earlier about, or you mentioned you thought maybe this was a test. But
which it still sort of was, because it was unintentional, but Bodie getting the detour and Stringer knowing about it and then saying there was nothing different with the mileage, and then Bodie not even thinking about that detour, because in the course of this, if you're missing your weight, you're not going to remember the detour. So it was just very interesting to show why Stringer's attention to detail actually is significant, because it would be able to catch any anomalies in the pickup if they did try to do something.
We learn in the scene I was just about to cover, and we can just kind of put this all together, because Stringer lets Bodie know that he's not in trouble, that Bodie did nothing wrong. And when I say kind of like bad examples or like these lame examples, Stringer says to Bodie, "Oh, you didn't hurt your foot when you kicked that paint bucket," and that's the one thing we saw the tail.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
Bodie do, and asks Bodie about the detour specifically, and Bodie looks at him like, "You were watching us the whole time," and Stringer's like, "Who, me?" I just thought it was it makes me think of like when your parents say like, "I'll be watching you," and he's like, "Oh, you're going to watch me at school," and like, "Oh, I'll see you on the playground," or, you know, if you're told to behave. And I felt like that was kind of the mentality, like you said, the power that Stringer has over Bodie, letting Bodie know I'm always watching. But with just this one lame example of, "Did you hurt your foot when you kicked the bucket like that?"
But what makes it lame, though? I guess I'm not seeing that part of it.
Because if Bodie were to ask what else happened, Stringer wouldn't have any other thing, because that's the only real thing that they reported to Stringer.
I mean, true, but the fact that he even knew that detail, right? Like, it is kind of the impressive part, I think. And I think from Stringer's perspective, I think since he killed Wallace, he's building him as one of his big lieutenants, and he wants to instill the fear through the whole organization through Bodie. So, like, if Bodie respects him that much and Bodie's his craziest soldier out there, they're going to respect him that much more.
Very true. Very true. I think we're getting to, for me, I feel like we'll talk about it in a minute, but I feel like we are getting to a or I think we're getting to, I don't know what the term would be, but almost a mirror image of the relationship between Wallace and D'Angelo, and the relationship between Bodie and Stringer. And so I
like opposite mirrors of it. Yeah, what is that called? I know exactly what you mean. But.
Yeah, so parallel? I don't know.
Parallel.
So I definitely feel like this is almost the first step of, remember, Stringer kind of recruited and coerced Bodie into killing Wallace last season. And we saw so much about the trust that Wallace had in D'Angelo. And I feel like these are kind of the steps in the way that Stringer is going about and getting that respect and that trust from Bodie by letting him know, "I was watching you." Now we've gone back and caught up on that. Stringer's in the jail with Avon and realizing that was not part of the plan. This was not a test. Stringer was expecting drugs, even though he didn't let Bodie know that there was actually something wrong. He played it off like this was all just a game. He's worried, and Avon's pissed. There's no drugs in that car, but Roberto took the money.
Yeah, so Avon makes it clear, play it firm, but play it respectfully. Like, they have our money, we have no product. And there's interesting advice, because Avon's making it clear that, he wants to maintain the level of respect for the organization while he's locked up. But also he wants to maintain the relationships. And if he cuts off his connect, that cuts off their whole pipeline. So
I guess Avon always handled the connect, right? He always handled the product. And that's what Stringer and his sister were talking about, that they needed to change at the end of last season before Avon went away to jail to insulate Avon. But it doesn't seem like Stringer has the street smarts to necessarily do these negotiations or talk this talk. And it does seem like Avon's almost giving him the vibe and the script of how to play this correctly. We also get a couple other details that those two guys that were on the tail of Shamrock and Bodie, their names are Tank and Country, who
One
I guess
fresh out. Yeah.
just came home from jail. And Avon's very impressed that those names are with the crew. And we also get another wireism when they say you only do 2 days in jail. It's the day you go in and the day you get out.
What does that mean?
So that means that no matter how much time you get, you can't let that affect you. You get 10 years, you get 20 years, you get a maximum of 8 years like Avon gets. You only do 2 days. You hold your head up when you go in, and then you think about the day that you're coming home. All that shit in between doesn't matter in life. That's how you mentally keep yourself prepared. You think about the day. You worry about it when you go in. You think about the day coming home.
I don't know if I understand it, but maybe it'll play off later on.
I think it's more of a, how you handling this. You've been in for so long. No, I'm only doing 2 days.
Gotcha.
So now we go to Nick, who goes to the docks to see about hours like he was asked to do before. And he meets up with another guy who basically, much like we learned about the drug business and learning about points on the package and getting salary pay and all that, we're learning a little bit about how the docks work. And like we talked about earlier, you need seniority to get hours, especially for specific ships that are coming in. And you can't get a full day of hours. And so Nick, at best, can maybe get a half a day, which almost, I guess, to these guys doesn't even seem worth it.
Right.
Another thing that we also see are lots of banners that are going on around the docks when Nick is walking to the ports about luxury homes that are going to be built and that are starting up in the neighborhood. So I just thought that was interesting, especially with all the talk that we had about Avon and his businesses or business storefronts that he owned that were going to be part of this multi-million-dollar construction plan.
Right. Yeah, that's the first thing I thought when I saw the homes as well.
There's a lot of, modern day and over the last 10, 15 years, which is when this show was really taking place. That's a big problem. This is a big problem for the docks, I imagine, with trying to get more business through the docks, is that the more luxury homes and condos and townhouses that get built, the less space there is for these blue-collar workers to do their business. We actually now go to Ziggy, who's going to now come pick up. He's almost sabotaging Nick. And I don't know where Nick's car is to why he doesn't just say, no, screw you. But Ziggy pulls up and he picks up Nick and he's like, come on, let's go see the Greek. And so Nick's like, oh, what am I going to do? So they go to this little cafe and we meet the Greek. Spiros is his name. And Ziggy is talking to everybody. And he even says, you must be the Greek. And Spiros says,
one of them at least.
What's that?
Like he says, I'm one of them at least, or something.
Well,
like
he says,
that.
at least I'm Greek at least, or something like that. And we meet Sergey. He looks to be kind of like the muscle man. And they're harassing him they're calling him Boris because they imagine that he's Russian. And he's annoyed by this. He hears this all the time. And he says, why Boris? And Ziggy's just getting on everyone's nerves. It's a bad look for the type of business they need to talk about in the first place. So Nick kicks him off, and Spiros hands Nick a piece of paper, and they kind of discuss same deal, same rate. And Nick asks who's going to be driving, and Spiros says it's going to be Sergey, and more talk about the Boris stuff. And Nick tells Spiros that we should switch up the drivers so that people don't get used to the same faces. And Spiros tells Nick, when you trust somebody, you stick with that person.
Yeah, so that's an interesting conversation in there because they both make good points.
Yeah, very. I thought very old school style business coming from Spiros.
Mm-hmm.
So Frank is looking around. They take off, and I think Ziggy said something like, you embarrassed me in there. And Nick says, you embarrassed yourself. And Frank now is looking around for Nick when Beatrice Russell, she has a nickname is Beatty, but I don't think, again, another character, I don't think we get her name.
Definitely not.
She pulls up in her car. She's Port Authority, and she's kind of fucking with Frank a little bit and talking about, oh, what are you guys stealing today? And and he's playing back. And Nick finally comes back with Ziggy, and he hands a piece of paper off to Frank, who, I guess gives it to the other guy. We don't really learn his name. His name is Horseface. We'll learn him later on, but he's got a nickname of Horseface, and he's in on this. Whatever's going on here with this can that's coming in, Horseface is in on the scheme.
And he makes a little interesting comment about BD driving around. He's like, you allow that? And he's like, I like her. What? So he almost implies you could shut that down if you wanted to, but you allow the police to sniff around. So,
yeah. I think also showing that really she's a non-threatening legal force, law force, or whatever. She's just kind of a nice lady, even though they are doing something illegal. So McNulty now comes to homicide just to kind of poke around and check on what's going on with, I guess he's looking for Bump, but he's checking in on the murder or on the floater, and really digs into Cole a little bit about some of the details that he noticed about the case, and Cole saying that he missed that. And Jay is telling us that Rawls has dumped this floater on Baltimore County because that's where they found her in the water. And so it's their problem, not the city's.
Right. So two things from that. It's A, the case is no longer a homicide for West Baltimore anymore because, like you said, he kicked it. But also that, they missed critical details on the dead body that McNulty did catch. So,
and I think also, almost showing McNulty can't help but be a good cop.
Is he a good? I mean, yes, he is a good cop, but even like the Avon thing, is he doing this because he cares, or is he doing this for himself because he was bored in the boat this whole time,
Well, I think just the fact that he noticed, true. Defense wounds, and he can't help, just in that little bit of time versus Cole, whose case it was, and Cole's like, oh, I didn't even know I was supposed to look for that. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, you're right. He's a good cop. Let me not take that from him. But I just think his motives are always selfish. So
possibly, yeah. Frank watches the can that's there now, and it gets dropped, and he can see Sergey off somewhere off to the side, and he's on a cell phone, not in the truck. Stringer meets a lawyer who is connected to Roberto, and this is where we get all the conversation, basically, that Roberto did not put the drugs in there. He's got problems with the DEA that have come up really around the time that Avon got arrested. And Roberto's lawyer tells Stringer that they find it really weird that Avon got such a little amount of time. And that could mean that he's cooperating with the police. They're not extremely accusatory, but they make it clear that they're not going to be doing business with Avon until they have some assurances.
And Stringer does get a little aggressive about the accusation.
Yeah. And they even talk about the paperwork that Stringer sent. Stringer sent the case paperwork to the Connect, so that Connect could be sure that Avon didn't say anything, but that doesn't necessarily work for them.
I missed that. I didn't catch that detail. Okay, cool.
Yeah, he said something about, I sent you all the paperwork, but regardless, the money is being returned. It's just in transit, and that this happened kind of all at the same time. The drug deal was supposed to happen. The money had been sent. Roberto was having these issues with the DEA. The drugs were not put into the car, but in the meantime, the money is in the process of being sent back to Baltimore. So at least we're not going to have some sort of a drug war or a you got our money war with New York.
No. But it is interesting because it looks like Stringer is going to have to find a new Connect maybe, or make good, like you said, some assurances that to still be able to buy from this guy.
Yeah. The can is still out in the open. This can that the Greek had asked for them to get, and that Sergey is supposed to be driving. And Horseface is freaking out. The seal, the custom seal on the can, which is an important detail, is broken. And Horseface is like, we got to get this thing out of here. And Frank is nervous, so Frank calls Nick. And Nick says that he's going to check into it. And so someone calls Sergey, who immediately gets in his truck and leaves without the can. Frank is freaking out, so he tells Horseface to lose the can in the stack, which basically means just pick this thing up and put it back somewhere and let's forget about it. Kima comes home to Cheryl, getting back into your favorite storyline.
Right.
This is where we get to find out basically that Kima is not happy with what she's doing. She's complaining about the paperwork, but this is really Cheryl making her do this. And we also get a nice little detail that these guys are working on a baby.
Oh, did I catch that? They were talking about names, right?
Yeah,
baby names.
And they're going to fertility doctor, and it's $1,000 per visit. And that's when Kima says, she says, there's an easier way if you would just pick like a suitable donor. And that's what Kima says, not with your pussy would I fuck these guys.
Right.
McNulty is studying tides and currents, and we're listening to now not jazz, but country music.
One thing we didn't mention, interesting little thing Jay said to McNulty when he was leaving. He was like, self-preservation, something you've never learned. And we see, he's right. McNulty's here. I don't know what he's doing, but we'll find out later. He's looking at the currents of and the wind and how it moves the tide, where he found that floater.
Yeah. Also, little detail I did skip over when they were in the homicide office that Jay does confirm that he told that, and he kind of almost gaslights McNulty a little bit. He goes, "I just told him where you didn't want to go. I didn't know that's where he was going to send you, but he still wants his $10 from McNulty." But Jay is the one that ratted him out.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we go back and forth a couple scenes, but we do get basically McNulty is studying these tides and the currents, and he's drawing lines and tracing, where the tide was and finding where this body ended up versus where it was likely dropped, and he faxes this information to Baltimore County.
Basically, which puts the murder back in the plate of Rawls and his group.
Yeah, the next morning, Rawls gets a copy of the fax, and he's calling out Jay, and he's confirming what happened, and he's amused. He's pissed, but he's amused. Bodhi is on the corner now, telling guys that violence isn't the way, kind of taking some words from D'Angelo a little bit. Also, they're talking about numbers, and this is where I started to really draw the comparison with his relationship to Stringer, because they're low right now, and Bodhi says, if we're low, it's because Stringer wants us to be low. Stringer's got everything taken care of, and reminds me back to when Wallace was waiting for the phone call, and he said, "Hey, D said wait, we wait."
Yeah, very similar.
Beatty is driving around the docks, and she now sees the broken seal on the can. So she is Port Authority. This broken seal, which Horseface mentioned earlier that they were all freaking out about with this can, now it's been spotted. And what seems to be just a very boring, monotonous job, it seems she definitely catches it. I don't think I would have caught something like this, but she knows what she's looking for. And so this broken seal makes her get out of the car. Right.
So she investigates further.
She starts going into this can, and it's a pretty big shipping container. And there seems to be like a compartment all the way in the back beyond the boxes. And Beatty opens up this back compartment, and there's a body that falls right out against the door. And she looks even further, and there's just dead girls all over. We all go to the union guys who are in their trailer, Frank and all those guys, and they're talking. And that's when we start to hear all the cops and the sirens. And someone pops in and tells them, like, "Hey, there's some dead girls in the can." And I got to be honest, everyone's pretty horrified. Like, they're just like Frank is like, "There's dead girl, like they're all dead girls." Like he can't believe that there's dead women in there, and everyone's faces are just like, "What?"
Frank's was different from everyone else's, though. Or am I misreading that? It was,
no, what did you
as shocked, but they're dead. The way he said it was different than almost that he wasn't surprised there were girls in there, but he was surprised there were dead girls in there. Now, I know I'm just hyperbole, but that's almost how it felt. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree that it was different, but I guess I took it more like, I looked at it more like a father finding out that there were dead kids. That's almost like he almost like he couldn't fathom, like, dead girls, or like, there's girls, like, oh, okay, there's girls, and he's trying to contemplate that, but it's like they're dead. And it's like they're dead?
Yeah, exactly.
Who does that? Like dead girls? Who does that? Like what a horrible, horrible thing to imagine.
Yeah, and thank you for clarifying because his character. What other movie is this guy from? Is he from RoboCop or no? Is he from the first RoboCop?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not a RoboCop aficionado.
All right. Well, the reason I asked is because this character, I have such sinister thoughts about him in the back of my head based on whatever role I know him from. So you telling me that he's got a real relationship with the priest and that he's so mortified about the fact that I was dead girls. Thank you for telling me this because now in the back of my head, I think he's like the evil villain of the season for some reason. And I think I needed you to clarify that, that's the reason why he said dead girls because he's so mortified by it, not that there's some other thing going on in his head. And then also the relationship with the priest is based off of like, partially that he's a good person, not necessarily that it's more the money. So I needed those two bits of information about him to understand who he was. And I don't think I was registering that for my first two watches. So.
Okay. I'm looking through here just on Wikipedia, and it doesn't look like he's a RoboCop guy. It looks like a lot of small roles in the late 90s, like Devil's Advocate and Face Off. He's the guy in Face Off, I think. I think when Nick Cage goes to jail, I think he's the big guy that Nick Cage beats up right away to act like he's tough, and then helps Nick Cage escape when they're all being electrocuted.
He's Dubrov? No way. Really?
Yes, Dubrov. I didn't think you'd know the name.
Yeah, I love Face Off. Wow, he's Dubrov? Really?
Yeah, he's Ivan Dubrov.
Okay. All right, maybe that's what I have. Maybe that's what it is. I didn't sleep with your wife.
He's also the photographer in the Notorious Betty Page biopic.
Never saw that. So.
I know him from True Blood.
Yeah, it's gotta be Face Off. I knew it was something like that. So
yeah, he's in he's in a bunch of TV shows. He's in Parks and Recs for a guest spot. He does look like another. He looks like the guy in The Office, the other bald guy in The Office that plays the traveling salesman.
Not familiar with that.
You know The Office?
Not enough to know who you're talking about now.
So that's really where everything ends with these dead girls, and the entire police now are on the scene, and we just kind of fade out on that. I guess overall, what are your thoughts now that you've watched it a second time? We've talked through this. How are you feeling about this episode?
Now how I feel about the episode, after watching it again, it was a really good episode. They had to set up everything first, which was the boring part, which would put me to sleep. But then they created the inciting incident for everybody's kind of story. The dead girls in the can, the weight not coming for the Barksdale crew. We have the threads that are going to kick off the stories. So I'm on board. And I thought they did a good job of, again, introducing a whole new world with some familiar faces. Again, they did do a good job. When I was receptive for it. So.
Were there any characters that you enjoyed, that like the brand new characters as far as Nick, Frank, Sobotka, Ziggy?
No, I didn't enjoy any of them per se, but Ziggy is clearly they made it very clear that I should know who Ziggy is, and Ziggy had several scenes that were either about him or where he stood out. So, he's important, I guess.
Anything that you're getting the sense of as far as, we talked about last season as far as it was the streets versus the police versus Omar and a three-way dance, and then Omar kind of joined in with the cops. Is there anything? There really is no adversarial relationship going on the show yet. We really don't even know of any targets of the police at this point.
Yeah, no adversarial relationships yet, but we can faction everybody right now if we wanted to. We have McNulty in the boat, right? They're their own faction. Mm-hmm. We have Homicide, Jay, and Rawls. You got the shipping yard people. What's his name again? I'm going to remember this season. Frank Sobotka.
Frank, Nick,
Ziggy, put all those guys together. You have the Greeks; they're their own thing. I'm forgetting someone. I said the Barksdale crew. Oh, the Connect. I mean, Roberto and those guys. They're their own thing. So there's a lot of different factions being formed. But yeah, there's no stakes yet where I know who's winning or losing yet. So,
and really, we've got beyond just the police. We've got kind of this side thing with Stan Valchek. In fact, that might be the first real adversarial thing that seems to be happening is
Valchek versus Frank. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. What about any returning characters? Anyone that I know you said you feel like Bodie now is probably a number 2 for you at this point. So is Bodie
we didn't get any Freeman? Or we got a little bit of him. He was walking with Bunk, right? In the beginning of the episode. Freeman?
I don't know. I think that was last episode.
Yeah, you're right. That was last episode.
Bunk and Freeman
McNulty off.
Yeah, with saying goodbye. Yeah,
but we didn't get any Freeman, so that was a little disappointment. Is he in this season? Can you tell me that? Or?
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. What about? I guess anything that you're looking forward to seeing progress, or anything that you're getting an inkling of at this point?
Only the most intriguing thing for me, honestly, is the situation with the weight and how Stringer is going to manage to, re-up the whole crew because their Connect doesn't want to sell to them, doesn't trust them. So that's really the only thing that I've gravitated to that I find interesting is how is Stringer going to maintain order on the streets now that they're running low? And Bodie seems to be a big part of maintaining that order already. And then also, how's he going to get more? So,
yeah. All right. Well, I'm excited. We'll continue on then with the next episode, season 2, episode 2, Collateral Damage.
Collateral Damage.
All right. So that'll be the next time for The Wire. And I guess it'll still be
your first watch.
Yeah. And then it'll be my rewatch.
All right.
We're getting so smooth at this.
Ish.
Later.
All right.